Aloha, I'm Jeff Mikulina, and pleased to be hosting today's conversation for the Hawaii Book and Music Festival and the UH Better Tomorrow series. Now, before we start, a note to everyone watching live, whether you're joining us on Zoom or otherwise, we invite you to submit questions and comments using the Q&A tool. Leah Laramie, the coordinator for the state's Climate Change Mitigation Adaptation Commission, will be fielding questions and also relaying some of those to the guests and us up on stage. If you're on social, you can submit media that way or submit questions that way, and we'll respond to them as best we can. Basically, we want to hear from you. We want this to be engaging, and we want to be responsive to all of the questions that are coming up for you. So today we have a really special session planned tackling one of the biggest challenges our planet faces. Climate change is an incredibly tricky issue. It's deeply complex. It's embedded in every part of our lives. It's really at the systems level. With the systems that we've built today, ordinary actions that we take often have extraordinary consequences. And so we really have to think differently about this challenge. And we have four excellent guests today that are going to be addressing this issue, talking about just not the everyday stuff, but really the systems things that we can do. Now, when I think about climate change and that systems change, it reminds me of this old show on National Public Radio called Car Talk. Some of you older folks might remember this show. It was just an automotive show. People would call in with their different challenges with their cars. And on one episode, someone called in saying, you know, my car won't start, the pistons are seizing, the transmission is shot. What can I do? And one of the hosts, it was either Click or Clack, says, you know, that's an easy one. You just pop the hood, reach in, unscrew the radiator cap, and then you screw in a new car underneath that. And I thought that was a great analogy for sort of some of the systems changes that we need to make in our energy system in order to tackle our climate challenge. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And we have one of the foremost systems thinker with us, Mr. Seth Godin, that we'll be bringing up in a moment. But before we do, I just want to share that it's not often that you get to have a conversation with one of your heroes, let alone have an interview on stage with him or her. So it is just a real pleasure, and I'm grateful to be able to have a conversation with Mr. Seth Godin, who, if you don't know, is a marketing genius. He has written some 20 bestsellers. He has talked about renewable energy. For decades, he has been doing one project after another, starting a couple of companies. He has the most popular marketing blog in the world. And he is a disruptor. He's a rule maker, a rule breaker. He's irreverent. Just a fantastic individual who's bringing his talents now to this issue of climate change. And in the past year or so, he has launched a new project that we'll be discussing today called the Carbon Almanac. And what it is basically is it's a compendium of all things climate. It was an effort, a labor of love in a lot of parts by volunteers around the world, some 300 experts, artists, chart makers, and then tons of volunteers in some 40 countries, I believe, that put their efforts and talents together to come up with something where we could have a shared understanding and really a common vocabulary around climate, so we could start to make the systemic changes we need to address this problem. So with that, let me turn this over to Seth Godin to dive in deeper about the motivations, the genesis of this project, and where it's heading. So turn over to you, Seth.
Wow, mahalo, and thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you for that lovely introduction. You're right. I've written a lot of books over the years, and it's worth starting by understanding why I would volunteer full-time a year of my life and then organize a whole bunch of other people, most of whom I didn't know, to do this project. And we're all volunteers, and we are now connected probably forever because we decided to try to make things better. And the entire purpose of the Almanac is to make it so that we can have a conversation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rant for a few minutes, and whenever you're ready to interrupt me and turn it into a conversation, please let me know. But I want to start by setting the stage so that people can understand what we're talking about when we talk about a systems problem. Let's say it's 400 years ago and you're some evil James Bond villain and you want to kill all the whales. One way you could kill all the whales is to put space lasers up there and use their power to zap the whales in the ocean. But unfortunately for you, lasers and satellites hadn't been invented yet. The other thing you could do is help people understand that whale oil is a really good way to light your house at night. And if that idea spread, you know what would happen? Some people would open lantern businesses. Some people would build whale oil refineries. And some people would go out and start hunting whales. And this actually drove the whales to the edge of extinction. And the only thing that saved them wasn't Greenpeace. It was the invention of kerosene. That a system existed that was undermining the existence of a planet. And where we are right this minute is beyond any doubt, beyond any argument. We are living in a world that is changing. It is changing right in front of us. And yet we don't understand enough. We don't feel confident enough to talk about it. We've been indoctrinated and brainwashed into believing things that aren't true. For example, that plastic recycling works. And as a result, we're either hesitant to talk about it or we're talking about the wrong thing. So I'm talking to you right now, 13 miles north of New York City on a tidal estuary called the Hudson River. And the Hudson River used to be a dump. The Hudson River was the place where everybody defecated. If you needed to go pee, you peed in the river. And it was poisoning our city. This was 100 years ago. What they did not say was, please, please, please don't pee in the river. What they did was they built a sewer system. And what they did was they made it against the law to pee in the river. And some of you who are watching this live near a school. And when you drive near the school, there's a sign that says you have to go 15 miles an hour. Now, there are some people who say it's my right to go 60 miles an hour. And we say, no, you can't. You can't because the lives of the kids of that school are too valuable. These are systems changes. And what we are trying to do with this almanac is not tell people what to do because it's not clear exactly what we should do. What we're trying to do, the 97,000 words with graphs and charts and diagrams, and yes, cartoons and cartoons and cartoons, where every single page is footnoted to a resource that we did not write. What we're trying to do with this almanac is make it so that people will be comfortable talking about it. So a little bit of history. In 1900, they had a gusher in Texas. That gusher spewed oil for 9 days. It had come around the same time as they found oil in Pennsylvania. And these two gushers led to Texaco and other oil companies, and they created the world we live in now, where we can take cheap fuel out of the ground, oil and coal, burn it, and create productivity. And that productivity led to industrialization. And the thing to understand when you start to talk about the climate is this. The air almost everywhere is pretty clear. On the screen in front of you are 10,000 dots, 100 by 100, 10,000 dots. It turns out that right now, if you take a gulp of air, 10,000, 4 of the dots are going to be carbon, just 4. When I was young, it was 3. And when it gets to 5, Earth as we know it will be fundamentally changed forever. And we have all this data from Hawaii, where scientists, an original scientist and then his son, and now an entire team at Scripps, have been measuring quite accurately how much carbon is in the air. And it's a little tiny number. But if we add just a bit, it stays there for a long time. And that greenhouse effect is changing the world we live in. Here is the global average temperature. And here is, in Australia, how often we see a temperature that we don't expect. So given that this is all happening, it's easy to say, it's simple. It's simple. There's just too much carbon in the air. But it's also really complicated. Complicated because we built our whole world around it. It's how you get elected. It's how you get rich. It's how you get a job. It's how you feed your family. It's how you get from one place to another. It's built into everything. And so we have to look at the systems. So I'll give you another systems example. In about 3.5 weeks, it's going to be Halloween. And Halloween is the holiday of cheap candy. And people often don't feel bad about buying cheap candy because you're going to have kids coming to your door. But the thing about cheap candy is it comes from cacao that's grown in Ghana and the Ivory Coast. And because the big companies that make cheap candy care so much about price, the farmers who grow that cacao make on average $3 a day. It's estimated that 30,000 people in that industry are slaves, and that there are lots of kids who grow the cacao. Now, that makes us feel bad. And we look at that and we say, all right, I'm not going to buy a Three Musketeers bar, which would help a little. What would help far more is to see that the system itself, innocent kids going door to door to get a $100,000 bar, lead to this giant problem. How do we fix the system? Well, my friend Sean Askinosie said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go meet the farmers directly. I'm going to pay them 10 times what other people pay them. I'm going to put their kids through school. I'm going to do open book management. I'm going to change the system of making chocolate. Sean was one of the first bean to bar makers in the world. Now there are bean to bar makers in Hawaii and other places. Systems change bit by bit, piece by piece, going from the early adopters, the nuts, the people who like to go first, all the way through the population to the masses. And so I'll wrap up my rant with a riff about more or less, because there are some people watching this who care about the climate, who say that the answer is more technology, fusion power, direct air capture, more and more humans bringing more technology to solve the problem. And there are some people watching this who believe in less. We need to have fewer children. We need to live less extravagant lives. We need to eat less. We need to change the way that we are in the world. You're either a wizard or a prophet. And that book, The Wizard or the Prophet, had a profound impact on everyone on the team who did this, because we saw how addicted we are to convenience. And so when we add things up like convenience, like the balance between more and less, and both sides are right sometimes, what we see is that we're facing a complicated problem. And the solution is we have to talk about it. We have to talk about it every time we talk to a politician, every time we talk to a CEO, every time we talk to someone who works everywhere. We need to create systems change. We need Meatless Monday. We need to address the idea that cows, the billion cows on the planet, are actually killing us. We will get there not by figuring out how to compost a little bit better in our backyard and quietly lowering our, quote, carbon footprint, which was invented by British Petroleum, but instead speak up and speak up. Speak up to ban leaf blowers. Speak up to make it so that the systems around us reflect the reality of the mess we've made, because we've been using something and we haven't priced it fairly. So working on this has been the most important project of my lifetime. I'm a volunteer. None of us get any money if you get a copy. What we would really like you to do is get 10 copies. Get 10 copies and hand them around and ask people what their favorite page is. Ask people what they want to talk about. Have the conversation. Every member of Congress in the United States has already received a copy. We've gotten nice letters from some of them. The conversation is important and we have to have it right now. So thank you for letting me rant. I'm happy to have a conversation with you, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for that, Seth. And I think we could listen all afternoon to this. This is just fantastic. But let's pick up on what you're just talking about that conversation, because that's difficult business for a lot of people. You're talking with someone, they say something that's a little bit off, and you don't want to ruffle feathers. You don't want, particularly in Hawaii, you don't want to create discomfort. Thanksgiving's around the corner. There are those conversations. What are your tips for folks that can just start that conversation?
Well, I have two tips. The first tip is there are some people who are oppositional on purpose. We call them trolls. Don't feed the trolls. You will not persuade someone who is there to have an argument that they are wrong, because people don't like to admit that they are wrong. So I begin by saying, if there's a troll across the table, just talk about something else, because we don't have time to make a sport for trolls. And then the second thing is to ask some questions, right? Would you like to know about the impact that cows have? Let's look it up. Would it be interesting to understand how people in other countries feed themselves without eating beef? What would happen if everyone in the world ate beef the way we eat beef in the United States? Have you ever wondered about which is cheaper, solar power or coal? Because I know it was disruptive for Hawaii to close its last coal plant, but was it cheaper for us to move on? Let's look it up. And if we can stand side by side with people instead of oppositionally to them, we can learn things. One of the things that's in the almanac is a 2-page spread of a memo from Exxon, written by a chief engineer at Exxon. And he wrote it 40 years ago. And in it, he described in detail exactly what the world would be like today. I would say to somebody at Thanksgiving dinner, let's read through the Exxon memo, see what you agree with and see what you don't.
And hopefully none of them work at Exxon, or maybe they do, because that would be a fantastic conversation to have. Before you've done so much to just disrupt the marketing industry and kind of overturn some of those longstanding rules. I often say we focus too much on the technology, even though I'm an engineer by training and I have a lot of comfort there. There's too much focus on Newtonian solutions and not enough focus on the psychology and the sociology behind climate. So what do you think about what it's going to take to really change our culture of energy, for us to think differently and act differently about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on changing the culture of energy.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And that's why my background as a marketer, because I'm not an advertiser, I'm a marketer. I help tell stories that change people's minds, is so urgent. Because yes, if we invented fusion power, 90% of our problem would be solved. Done. That would be a great technical solution. But until that happens, and it's been 5 years away for the last 60 years, until that happens, we have to change minds. Only when we change minds will living in a society where you get to make choices, will people begin to make choices that make a difference. And what's interesting is the plastics industry understood this. They saw that they were going to get in trouble 40 years ago. So they invented the idea of plastics recycling, even though they know it can't work at a physical level, because they could change the culture just a little bit. And, there used to be litter all over our country, including on your beautiful islands. And now litter is less, not because we came up with a technical solution, but because we created a cultural dynamic. And all of these things happen when we talk about it and we give people a story they can work with. And so some people need to hear the story of selfishness. You should get an electric car because it's wicked fast. Some people need to hear the story of generosity, which is you should do things this way, even though they're a little inconvenient, because your grandchildren will thank you. And different stories change the culture in different ways. I am not the vice president of stories, but I can tell you that climate activists have been terrible at telling stories for a really long time. Global warming is a dumb name. We should have called it atmosphere cancer, but no one asked me.
I think some of that also is what comes with the stories is how we normalize our social response, our social behavior in a carbon constrained world. So stories are one piece of that. How else do we kind of normalize what the appropriate response is? And just as an example, in Hawaii, the most popular vehicle is the Toyota Tacoma. It's been that way for 18 years running. People love their big trucks here. They don't necessarily need them, but it's normalized. It's what you buy here. How do we change that normalization?
So capitalism made us all rich. Even the poor are richer than they would be if there wasn't capitalism in the world. And the reason is it's about discovering problems in the market and solving them. And the reason we are in this jam is the problem of carbon was hidden and fuel was sold too cheap. Once we adjust the price of fuel correctly to build into the price of fuel what it costs all of us, the smart thing to do will not be to drive a Toyota Tacoma. People who drive them now think they're smart. They think they're smart because it fits in with the social group they want to be in. It gives them status and affiliation. It gives them utility. But when gas costs what it's supposed to cost, every single time they fill up, they're going to feel stupid. And people will make new decisions based on new information. And if you remember, there used to be a car called the Hummer. And what happened was the Hummer became uncool. And it became uncool because it made the drivers feel stupid. They couldn't park it anywhere. They couldn't fill it up. People looked at them funny. It wasn't a status symbol, except in certain zip codes in Texas. And so these things are happening, and they will continue to happen. People like us do things like this, but we don't make them happen by punching people in the face. We make them happen by connecting with other people, amplifying our ideas, establishing the new normal based on new information. And it's easy to be pessimistic, but I will remind you that it only took us 20 years to pave the earth. It only took us 15 or 20 years to go from gay marriage is unthinkable to gay marriage is legal. And we are capable of changing the culture if we are persistent and consistent and generous in the way we do it.
And your book Tribes spoke to that, and the power of tribes in, adhering to that sort of shared value system and changing that way. Let's get to the Carbon Almanac and talk a bit about the genesis of this project. How did this come about?
So I read a book. Well, I wrote my first blog post about climate change 16 years ago, and it didn't change anything. It didn't solve the problem. Go figure. And then, even though I would mention it now and then, I didn't really talk about it much because I felt uninformed. And I read a book by Kim Stanley Robinson called Ministry for the Future, which is a fantastic novel, broke my heart, changed my life. And I said, there's a lot here I don't know. And if I don't know stuff, other people don't. And I've written almanacs before, the Business Almanac, the Celebrity Almanac. I understood how to present facts. But I didn't want to do it myself because that wouldn't be the metaphor for systems change that we need. So on September 9th, I invited 10 people to an online discussion board. And by the end of the month, we had 100 people and off to the races. We delivered it 2 days ahead of schedule, under budget, ready to go to the printer. And now it's available all around the world.
It's fantastic that you sort of modeled what we need in doing this project. What surprised you though in that effort?
I think that the lesson of page 19 is the biggest takeaway I have. There wasn't one person in the team, including me, who was competent and trained to write any single page of the almanac. Nobody who had the infographic skill, the researching skill, the writing skill, the layout skill, the design skill to make a page. And so we adopted a posture of do which little bit you can and then improve somebody else's. And that posture of it's not the worker, it's the work. Criticize the work, make the work better, repeat. That's how you build everything. If you walked around San Francisco in 1880, it wasn't complete. All these things about it needed to be improved. It still needs to be improved. And we do things that way in our culture, a little bit at a time, not central planning. Every single person adds a little bit, right? And that posture of connection and generosity thrilled me. It got me through some very long days. This is depressing stuff for some people, and it gave us hope because we were excited it's possible.
That's so fantastic, and it continues. I've received those emails every day, your daily drip of different stories, different challenges, different solutions from agriculture to clean energy. But talk to us about some of those solutions. What are you most hopeful about? Maybe not on the technology side, but where do you see progress really moving quickly?
Well, the single easiest way, if we had a king or a queen, probably a queen because it would work better, the single easiest way we could address this problem is to say, those billion cows, we got to get rid of them. They're not cute. Billion cows are responsible for 25% of our problem. But that's not going to happen right away. The other thing is many, many countries are discovering that when you price carbon fairly, maybe you give people a dividend. You're not using it to tax people. You're using it to simply have the market reflect what carbon costs. It makes a change happen. I expect that idea to spread. And once we had the border adjustment, it means that if just a couple big countries start doing it, every country is going to have to do it. And the third thing I would say is that the price of alternative energy is plummeting, and it's plummeting faster than ever before. And as people discover that they can get reliable, off the grid, renewable energy that doesn't involve fancy equations and things coming from far away, they like it. They like it a lot because it gives them resilience and independence. And I've been to villages in India that were pitch black at 5 o'clock at night and now have light. But that light isn't coming over a wire. That light is coming from light they're making themselves. It's pretty cool to see.
It's just phenomenal how quickly things have evolved in the past decade in that space. And I think part of the problem is our thinking is stuck. A lot of us have these narratives that we tell ourselves that are outdated, either about the challenge itself, but also the solution set. I remember solar back in 2003. It doesn't work very well, right? But now, the acceleration of the price drops, the technology, in Hawaii, we were about 12% renewable a decade ago or 12 years ago. Today, that has jumped forward to nearly 40%. And one island in particular, the far west island called Kauai, is now nearing about 70% renewable energy, up from about 10%, a decade ago. And it's just fantastic because they're doing it around the clock. Some days they hit 100%, a sunny day, they have battery backup. They actually don't have wind energy there because of the birds. So it's just, we hear this constant, oh, it's not going to work. We can't power a 21st century economy on clean energy. And yet here we have this example in the middle of the Pacific showing what it looks like.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing is the defenders of the status quo are good at defending the status quo because that's why the status quo sticks around. There are far more taxi drivers in the United States than there are coal miners. And when Uber came along, no one listened to the cab drivers. We're like, oh, we like Uber, done. But the coal miners, of which there's only 75,000 full-time coal miners in America, have captured certain interests, and it's a real problem. So we're going to have to figure out not how to protect what we have, but how to protect what we can have, how to create the conditions for these ideas to spread and stick. We are capable of doing this if we can make cultural change happen.
Seth, a couple more questions before I move on to other guests. First, I want to talk about this challenge that a lot of us face as we get into learning about climate change and how scary it is. Sometimes people move from this sort of apathy or denial, and then they jump straight to despair without stopping in the middle, which is where the action happens. So how do we get people to stop there and think, all right, what's my role in this challenge? How can I contribute? And not despair. It's easy to despair. I mean, you read about Florida, you hear about Pakistan being a third underwater. It's hard not to think about what's the point at this point.
Yeah, what's the point? Because we're all going to die. But that's always been true. We're always going to die. So the question is, until you die, what are you going to do about it? And there are some people who are going to say, well, I've always been, smoking cigarettes and eating cake for dessert. Bring it on, because we're all going to die. And some people say, yeah, but I might be able to make things better while I'm here. That gives me hope, showing up to make things better for the people who come in behind me. And I don't think I can help somebody who is committed to just partying on. There have always been people like that, and we've gotten by okay. But for the rest of us, the idea that you can do something is so gratifying. We have so much privilege, so much leverage, so much opportunity. Let's do something about it. Because I would hate in 10 years for a kid to come show up at my door and say, yeah, and what did you do when you knew what was going on and you had a chance?
So we just have a couple of minutes here, Seth, to wrap up. So if you could share, I'm sure you've flipped some switches in people's minds today and opened some hearts. What would those actions be? What can folks do this afternoon, next week, next month, to really make a durable difference on this challenge?
Don't try to solve this problem in one day by recycling some plastic. We're starting to compost. We're looking for systems change. Here's a free book. You can get it online, download it. It's a book for kids. Get every single kid in your kid's school to get a copy of the PDF. Sign up for the free email that comes every day. Listen to one of the 40 podcasts that we've created. Get the teacher's guide. Share it with your Board of Education. Figure out how to create meatless Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at the high school cafeteria. Get leaf blowers banned in your community by getting 10 people together. That's all it's going to take. Start a book club, hand out copies. We're trying to make systems change. That's going to take more than a week before you get distracted by the next emergency. And there's always another emergency. So we need to ignore breaking news, ignore Wolf Blitzer, ignore the debate of the moment, and instead say, I'm going to commit to changing a little part of the system, because there are a lot of people on your side and it's contagious. Ideas that spread win. And we have a chance to spread this idea.
Thank you so much, Seth. And I think the takeaway too is this is not a spectator sport. We all have a role to play here, and you've given us a lot of ideas. I just want to thank you for bringing your talents and energy to this issue. Again, been following you for a couple of decades, and it's just so incredible to see this effort that you have created and where it's heading. So mahalo to you, and thanks for joining us and sharing with us today.
Thank you all. Enjoy. We'll see you.
All right, we're going to go now from New York to Hilo, and I'd like to introduce Noelani Kalipi, who is Executive Vice President of Progression Energy. And if you haven't heard of Progression, They are a offshore floating wind platform. But Noelani is much more than that. She's a community advocate. She is the community CASA. I'm going to remember CASA. Civilian aid to the Secretary of the Army, who helps to build bridges between military affairs and communities. But Noelani is a big thinker. She's worked on clean energy for a number of years, and she is really helping us think through what it's going to take to get to our clean energy future. So let me ask you first. You listen to Seth. What resonated with you in his remarks?
I think what resonated the most was the messaging, right? I think to so many people, climate change is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. It's too big to deal with, so let somebody else worry about it, right? And I think there's an old adage that people remember how you make them feel, and that spurs them to action, not necessarily what you said, right? So we have to find the ways to reach everyone and help them understand that what they do in every minute and in their house every day has an impact on the larger picture. And how do we connect the dots so that it's not overwhelming?
Right.
All I got to do is this one thing and I'm contributing. And then when I see the difference and I feel good, what else can I do? Yeah. And let me tell my friend, right? And really build the momentum.
Yeah, exactly. And so Seth shared some of those ideas. Mm-hmm. And then how we build kind of some of those tribes. So people are like, oh, you did that, I can do that.
Right.
It's kind of a La Lima thing. We're all have our hands on making the change happen. But this change has to happen quickly.
Correct.
And we've sort of, I think, in Hawaii, picked a lot of low-hanging fruit, and we have some big challenges ahead of us. And you're tackling some of those changes. So what does that look like?
Well, I think, we started the conversation a while back. So the conversation has been ongoing. And yes, we started with electricity, right? And we still have a long way to go, but we're making strides. People now understand the importance of us being able to generate our own electricity and not be dependent on foreign countries for our fuel supply, right? That's a big deal. Right. People can see the one plus
Russia
one.
And Libya.
Exactly. And be subject to things like what happened this morning when OPEC decides to cut supply, and what's that going to happen, right? We are making strides with our electricity. And again, we have a long way to go still, but we're making strides. In addition, we need to start thinking about transportation and what are we using, right, to fuel our cars? What are all of the ramifications? Like for so many of us, we don't understand how much imported fossil fuels is attached to everything that we do in our life, right? So broadening the scope, but also maintaining what we need for clean energy and renewable energy. And to the point of low-hanging fruit, there's going to have to be some change, right? It's going to be a little bit more expensive to begin with, but we need to understand what are the steps we have to take in the short term to be able to benefit in the long term. Right. And what Seth said about thinking about what can we do, there are those who are going to say, well, I've been eating cake and I've been smoking and it's been fun and I'm going to die anyway. Right. But then in Hawaii, so many of us think about our kiki, right, and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren and 7 generations beyond and looking 7 generations back. And I think we have a special place in Hawaii because of the depth of science and engineering in our ancestral knowledge. That tell us if we look at the clouds, we know where it's going to rain. If we look at the way the current is hitting, we know what's happening. If we look at this flower blooming, we know what fish we can go fish for, right? Taking all of that knowledge and accepting the challenge of, okay, this is the convenience of our life. And how do we take what we knew from before? How do we address where we have to go in the challenge? And how do we move forward? Right? Particularly looking for how are we going to leave Hawaii for our great, great, great grandchildren and our nieces and nephews for everybody who doesn't have children.
Yeah. And that's a difficult exercise for people to think about. I mean, let alone tomorrow, let alone 5, 10, 100 years from now. You mentioned Native Hawaiian ancestral knowledge. We had the opportunity to meet someone in Kauai, Malia, I believe her name was, who worked at the salt ponds in Hanapepe, generations and generations, and knows about the water salinity, knows about the water level and what's happening with the clay. And phenomenal, she is an author in the IPCC 5th assessment report for climate change, using some of that local indigenous knowledge. Are there some other examples where you see local knowledge really applying to?
Absolutely. And if we look at soils, right? I mean, when we move to food and we look at the health of soils and what does that mean in terms of carbon capture, in terms of how we can grow our own food, in terms of how we replenish the ecosystems, right? There's a lot of work happening here at the university, and particularly with the Office of Indigenous Innovation on those kinds of efforts. So absolutely. I also think that Pacific Islands, because we are the example in the Pacific that is getting so affected by climate change, you know, we're making a big we have a large voice at the international level. People are willing to listen.
Right, and you see that. You see Hawaii having a kind of an outsized influence.
Yes.
So talk to us about that, because I think some people think, oh, Hawaii, come on, our emissions, I think you said decimal dust, are just a rounding error. So even if we ratcheted down our emissions to zero, it's not going to make a difference, right?
No. Even, I mean, when we're looking at the way of life as creating the example for the globe, there's so much to learn. There's so many other places, so many other topics where there's a chasm between what was and what can be and what's happening in between, right? And in Hawaii, given our geographic isolation in the middle of the Pacific, given our robust renewable resources, given the many climates we have, and given the diversity of perspectives on multiple levels for systems change, we have the opportunity to show, how do we address this? How do we solve this, right? And ironically, going back to the cultural and psychological aspect of what Seth was talking about, it comes down to having a conversation. It comes down to being willing to create the brave space.
Yeah.
Right? Safe space is important too. And we've become very good at that and inviting and including everyone. But we also have to be willing to have the brave space where it's uncomfortable. And we have to be able to marinate in that discomfort to be able to get to the next level. Right. To be able to understand what we're doing and understand what we do as individuals and how that affects everyone collectively. So we always talk a lot about being in the same canoe and paddling in the same direction. But in this case, we can definitely paddle in the same canoe, and we can be in many different canoes paddling the same way, right? So we can be thousands of canoes going in the same way and having the ripple effect that makes a lot of difference. And by creating that example in so many of the topics, but particularly with respect to climate change, we can really set the stage and encourage others and say, hey, it's not so overwhelming. We can do it one step at a time.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned brave space, because we're going to be having a lot of brave conversations in the near future about energy in Hawaii. And it's difficult because it does mean change. It means disruption in many cases. As I like to explain it, I mean, it's sort of our energy is coming home. I think we used to import crude and then we would export carbon dioxide. And that worked well when the climate wasn't changing and oil was cheap. But we know better today. And so this means it's going to be present on the islands. It's going to be visible. It's going to be part of our lives. And this creates friction. So there are going to be some community conversations with disrupting business models. How do we go about doing that in Hawaii and doing it in a way Hawaii style, so we can move with everyone?
I think it's important to make sure that we include everyone in the discussion. We cannot say, oh, you don't agree with us, so you cannot sit down. Come, we have to say, come, let's be curious. Let's all listen together. We have to find the part that we can all agree on. And for so many of us, that's a thriving Hawaii. We can agree. Like I can say I can't stand to be next to you and I don't like anything coming out of your mouth, but I respect the fact that you love this place as much as I do. So let's start there. Right. And so we have to be inclusive. We also have to be realistic, right, about the speed at which things can change. And we have to be willing to acknowledge our past mistakes without judgment, right? And for some of us, we have to be willing to forgive the other person, right? I think we have to get beyond the hero, villain, victim mentality and say, okay, we can acknowledge the, that you made me like, if it were me and you, I can say, Jeff, when you said this 5 years ago, you really, really made me angry. And for 5 years, I don't want to listen to anything you had to say, right? We got to get over that and be able to say, okay, how do we come together and you can, we acknowledge our mistakes. We say this is the space and we set our intention, because it comes down to intention. Right. And we say, okay, what can we do? But it is going to be difficult. We are going to have to see wind farms that we didn't see before. We are going to have to see acres of solar, right? We are going to have to look at our the opportunities for geothermal. We are going to have to look at hydro. But the opportunity is that we can really look at, what does community participation mean in the development, construction, operation, and decommissioning of these projects. And we can reset how, quote, development is done in Hawaii, so that there's equity and reciprocity. Yeah. And we can make sure that the regulations are there to really protect the collective good, as opposed to being utilized as litigation tools. Yeah. And those kinds of things. But we need the intent to be able to move forward. Exactly. And I think what you described is a future that we need to hear more about, because we talk about climate change, and too often it feels like it's this sacrificial, right? We have to sacrifice so much. Right. I mean, Seth already ruined Halloween for us. But I think the thing is changing at the systems level. And I mean, the simplest way, jumping in an electric vehicle today is an upgrade from a gas car. It's not a sacrifice, but there are some things that are going to be more challenging. But if we paint this picture and show people the future we're moving into, it's not just a little less bad from a climate change future. It's actually a thriving way where we can address a lot of the other systemic problems we have in Hawaii. Absolutely. And I think we have to also meet people where they are. I think for a long time too, in this space, there's a lot of judgment. And then there's a lot of self-perception of, oh, I'm not good enough, or I got to do it this way. We got to be willing to, that's what I mean about the brave space and acknowledging. Yeah. We got to be willing to say, okay, like, I love to eat steak. Yeah. Like, knowing that cows, I'm thinking, oh man, how am I going to just switch eating steak all the time, right? We have to be able to acknowledge it, even small things like that, and then be able to move forward. Like, yeah, trucks are useful. Yeah. So how do we make them more renewable? Right? Maybe it's an electric truck, right? But thinking through those things. And I also think that it's kind of like, and I'm borrowing this phrase from someone, Kuha'u Zane, who when he said this really clicked for me, which was, it's kind of like making sure everybody has the Wi-Fi passcode. How many times do we sit around and we can't, we don't know what's happening, we don't have the information, we can't connect. But once you get the Wi-Fi passcode, it's like, oh, all this information. I still have the autonomy to choose, but now I understand it and understand how it relates to what I'm trying to do. Yeah. Right. And we have to make that available for everyone, so that they have their autonomy and they can make their choices and they can see how they contribute widely to everything. That's a perfect analogy to wrap up on, making sure we all have the right Wi-Fi passcode, so we can be in dialogue, we can be on the same page and move forward together. So thank you so much for coming over and joining us today, Noelani, and thank you for all you do in the community. It's really making a difference. Thanks. Mahalo. Mahalo. So now we're going to bring up a couple of other guests, switching some gears here and talking to some people who are making change in a different way. First, we have an attorney from Our Children's Trust. She comes to us from the mainland. They are working with a local group called Earth Justice on a very novel lawsuit, asking the State Department of Transportation to engage more on climate change, to do more to make our transportation system less reliant on carbon. And then with her is a young woman named Mesina. She is from Kailua, Lanikai area, and she's a plaintiff in this lawsuit. So she actually has skin in the game at a very young age, asking the state to make a change. So let's turn it over to these two guests, Mesina and Andrea. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And so let me start with you, Mesina. I'm curious why you chose to engage in this. I mean, you're young. You're 14, 15?
15, yes.
15 years old. Not many young people sue the state. So what's motivating you?
I think just experiencing what I experienced that I know is from climate change, and hearing the stories from around the world and in my community of how youth are suffering, and then also understanding, what it is now and what it will become in the future. To be given an opportunity to be a part of an incredible case like this, it wasn't really a choice in my mind. that I would not stand up for Hawaii in this way.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen changes in your lifetime already.
Absolutely. Yes.
Andrea, why don't you share a bit about, just so we're up to speed on what this lawsuit is and what you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I work for an organization called Our Children's Trust. And for the last decade, we have been representing young people like Mesina in climate change cases against governments. It really ties to our first guest today talking about systems change. So our cases focused on the government systems that are causing climate change. And the case in Hawaii is unique because it's our first case that's really focused on the transportation system. So the state of Hawaii operates and creates a transportation system. It's harbors, it's highways, it's air transit. And they're doing so in a way that results in really high levels of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's contrary to what Hawaii law requires. For the last 30 years, Hawaii has had great laws on the books with respect to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting young people in Hawaii, and the state agency has not fulfilled those requirements. And so we're asking the court to engage and to declare that young people like Mesina have a constitutional right to a clean and healthful environment that includes a stable climate system.
Incredible. And you're not alone. You have 9 other plaintiffs with you, all youth in Hawaii.
13 other plaintiffs.
Oh,
Yep,
13.
and they're all from the different islands in Hawaii. Yes.
Okay, and then all kind of sharing some of your challenges that you've already dealt with climate, and then obviously looking forward towards the future and concerned if we don't get our arms around this challenge, what it could look like. So talk to us about some of the things, because obviously you've thought through where Department of Transportation is falling short in this regard. And the immediate thing that comes to mind here, just to vetch a little bit, and maybe this isn't in the suit, but we just built these 2 huge rental car centers, one in Honolulu, one in Maui, and none of them have electric vehicle charging or even the capacity to put in chargers in the future without massive upgrades.
Yeah.
So it's thinking like that really is kind of shooting ourselves in both feet, because we're doing things by default and not by design.
Yeah, you're exactly right. In transitioning and decarbonizing the transportation system, which is what the law in Hawaii requires, that takes time. That's something that you can't just flip a switch and all of a sudden the system is decarbonized. You really need to plan and ensure that you have the charging stations, that the infrastructure is available so that people can still get around the island, whether it's walking, transit, electric vehicles, bikes, but you have to invest in those kinds of modes.
Right.
And what we've seen with the Department of Transportation, they're really good at building new lane miles. And that's just not what is needed in the islands right now. You know, you need to start focusing on decarbonizing the transportation system. So that's what our case is about. And we present a number of different examples of what the Department of Transportation has done with respect to where are they budgeting, you know, what are they funding, what are they prioritizing? And it's really clear that they're prioritizing projects that result in fossil fuel emissions. And that needs to change. And that needs to change immediately, because the state law has some firm deadlines with respect to decarbonizing the transportation system. And because it takes so long, because the crisis is such an emergency, the legislature has called it an emergency. We need to get going on that right away. And our hope is that when a court orders the agency to fix its transportation system, it will comply with that court order.
Mesina, now you're in high school, I assume. What is the kind of the conversation like with your friends? I mean, imagine, is this top of mind for people? Are people talking about climate change? I know at your age, at any age, we have a lot of other things on our mind, things happening. Climate change, though, I mean, is it something that's really relevant among your friends?
I'd say when you bring it up, people are definitely there and supportive, and they're like, oh yes, you know, what you're doing is great, or yes, I'm with you, or, you know, last week I went to a beach cleanup. However, I think the cool factor a lot of times gets in the way, because oftentimes, you know, going to a rally with signs like isn't exactly the coolest thing to do on a Saturday afternoon. And, you know, I do notice when the opportunities come, you know, when I'm like, okay, we're going to the courthouse, we're going to be making some noise. It's like, oh yeah, that's great, I'm proud of you. And then it's like, you know, I'm busy or whatever. So I'd say there is sometimes a conversation, but it is rather frustrating because people will be like, yes, I'm with you, I totally understand. And then there won't be anything else. It's like people understand, but I'm always suspicious whether they do enough, because if they did, would they be involved in more action?
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, old habits die hard, whether you're Department of Transportation or whether you're a young person. But it feels like that. I mean, it's changed somewhat with folks like Greta Thunberg, others that are really like holding the banner and motivating. So, I mean, do you see it changing? Do you feel, I mean, on social media and other places where there's just these new avenues to connect with people and be inspired?
I do see changes on certain levels. And I think it just depends on which group you're a part of, honestly, because I have one friend who goes to this school, and the whole school's community is built around climate change and making action. And so I'll go to a rally and the whole school seems like it'd be there. So it is the cool thing for everyone to be there at this rally. And then I'll have other friends who won't be aware that anything is even happening. So I think it really depends on which group you're a part of.
Yeah.
And I hope that the more that this case is heard about, that it'll reach the groups who maybe are a little bit in the dark about what's going on and what they can do to help.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you both listened to Seth. Anything stand out in particular about his comments in his book?
For me, it's talking about systems change, that's what we're talking about. You know, individual choices certainly play a role, but we need system change. And, you know, the role that Mesina is playing in that is engaging the judicial branch. The judicial branch has not engaged in this crisis. And really what we've learned through time, you know, we have three branches of government in this system, and the judicial branch has to step in when constitutional rights are being violated. And that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing young people who are denied access to places and that they've known their entire lives, or the health effects that they're experiencing. The mental health effects, particularly with young people, is incredible, because they see what the future holds. They understand what the science says, and they understand the urgency of the crisis. So I think recognizing that there is that system change, and that you do need the judicial branch to come in and declare what the law requires. That's a vital part of any system change. And we've seen that through the civil rights era, with education, all sorts of systems that governments operate. When they do it unconstitutionally, the courts need to step in. And that's what we're asking for in this case. Yeah.
And I wasn't sure what page in Seth's book the legal action was, but so great that you guys are doing this. It's next level, really. What about you? Anything from Seth that really kind of hit home?
Yeah, I agree with Andrea. Really, the systemic action. And, you know, I think it's very easy for people to be like, you know, I did this, or I recycled this can, and really feel that they're doing something. And I feel like all these things that we do, yes, they are important, but it sometimes, I think, gets in the way of people feeling like they're making a true difference. And so I think it's just important to have both conversations open. If we're only talking about these individual ways that we can help, and not being like, this is how you can directly jump into the system and make change, like joining a lawsuit or something like that. Obviously, the change that we'll see is going to be quite different.
Yeah. Andrea, you know, when you talk about utilizing the judicial system, I'm very familiar with the legislative side of things and working to pass many of those policies in Hawaii. But even then, it's such a challenge because of how our system is set up. We're not necessarily using the best available science to establish these policies. I mean, we would have set a 2035 goal instead of 2045. But it comes down to compromise. And I think it's such a challenge. It's such a challenge at the national level when we essentially have, you know, half of our folks in the Senate not really accepting climate or wanting to act on it. And so what we end up with is something that's kind of muddled through and a big compromise, and not necessarily going to move us at the speed and scale necessary. So all that to say, what are you looking at for a timeline for this suit?
Yeah, in this case, we are about to argue the motion to dismiss. The government is arguing that Mesina does not have a right to access courts in Hawaii to vindicate her constitutional rights. So that's the first quarrel that we have to deal with, is we have to prove that Mesina should be able to access her courts to vindicate her constitutional rights. And once we get past that first hurdle, and then we'll be on the road to trial. And that's hugely important, because we will be able to tell the story of how the Department of Transportation has persistently perpetuated the use of fossil fuels in the transportation system. And that reckoning is really important. And in courts, you can't do perjury. So it's where facts can be known. So, and not only that, but Mesina's story and our other plaintiffs will be able to tell their story. They will be able to explain in open court how their lives are being harmed because of climate change. So that's a hugely important step. And we hope that that will happen next year. And then the court will rule. And what the court does is they declare what the law requires. They set the constitutional standard. You know, the court doesn't write policies. That's, as you said, that's the sausage making in the legislature. But the court can say, this is the constitutional line that cannot be crossed. And what we're advocating for is that the constitutional line is that you cannot sacrifice the lives of young people in Hawaii, because they can't vote. They're politically powerless, so they are not involved in the legislative process in that way. They don't have money to lobby as older people do. So they really are dependent upon present generations doing what needs to be done. And to date, we've put an extraordinary burden on young people and future generations because we're passing along the problems to them. And that's one of the reasons I think why Mesina is a plaintiff and standing up for her constitutional rights.
Yeah, inheriting decisions of the adults today is what's happening. I think some people get a little bit squeamish when they hear like, oh, lawsuit, things like that, right? But this is an important tool that we have when governments, when businesses aren't moving fast enough. In fact, very novel at the national level with the Juliana case. Again, youth kind of calling on government to move faster on climate. So what do you really hope to, because sometimes people are mixed up with what a lawsuit means and what you're seeking to achieve here or get, but what's the best case for you at the end of this lawsuit?
Yeah, our theory of change is that you really need the court to recognize that young people have constitutional rights at stake when it comes to the climate crisis. That's huge, because then that really guides how the policies are created and implemented. Once there's a constitutional standard that you cannot cross, and you see that in cases like Brown versus Board of Education. The monumental part of that decision was they said separate but equal is unconstitutional. The court didn't say, okay, here's what we're going to do about it. The court said these are constitutional lines that cannot be crossed. And we don't have that in the climate, with the climate yet. Judge Aiken, the judge in the Juliana case, for the first time, she recognized that there's a fundamental right to a stable climate system that sustains human life and liberties. And that has been incredibly important. And it's a recognition that the Hawaii Supreme Court has echoed in one of their decisions. In courts around the world are starting to echo and recognize that. And that's really what we're hoping for, is the recognition of the right. But they also need to start holding political branches accountable. That's really what the Holy Grail is, right? To ensure that the emissions start going down. It's one thing to have policies and plans. It's another thing to not implement those policies so that you're not seeing the emissions reductions. In Hawaii, emissions are higher than 80% of countries on Earth per capita emissions. That's high. So what happens here matters greatly. So that's the hope of our cases. And also it inspires other young people around the world. You know, the Juliana plaintiffs inspired a movement of young people, including Greta Thunberg, in terms of making sure that young people are speaking up and standing up, and so that their voices are heard, which is really important when we're dealing with these kinds of cross-generational systemic changes.
Yeah, exactly. And just, I mean, when you said that the court ruled that you have a right to a stable climate, I mean, it just sounds like, okay, is that where we're at right now? Yeah. I mean, this is,
and governments fight that.
Yeah.
And they should be welcoming that, because political branches need help. This is not an easy crisis to solve. The governor can't do it alone. The legislature can't do it alone. Courts do need to weigh in and ensure that constitutional rights are recognized and protected.
Right. And in a lot of ways, it's like you're giving them some cover too, right? Because it's difficult to face voters sometimes with these issues, but it's like, hey, the court's making us do this. Yeah. So there is some benefit there.
Yep. Definitely.
Yeah.
The Constitution made me do it defense.
Yeah, exactly. So let me just kind of, we're going to be wrapping things up here, but Mesina, share a bit about what you're hopeful and optimistic for. You're involved, you have a feeling of agency that you can make a difference on this. So share a bit about what you're hopeful for in the future.
I really hope that adults, particularly those in governmental power, start to listen to us on a deeper level, and instead of just hearing us and being like, yes, I get it, it's complicated, we'll figure it out, to really listen to us and be like, goodness, I'm so sorry that we have let this happen to you, and we're really going to do everything in our power to make a difference, because my grandchildren are being affected, you're being affected, and we want to leave a good earth for future generations. And I think only then really will we start to see change. So yes, I'm hopeful that people will start to listen, and the more noise that we make, the harder it will be for everyone to close their ears.
That's a perfect message to wrap on. So I want to wish you both good luck in your case, and thank you so much for raising this issue and doing what you're doing for climate. So
Yes,
mahalo.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Well, thank you for joining us for this conversation today. I particularly want to thank the College of Social Sciences and the Digital Studio here for hosting us, and the student staff of the Better Tomorrow speaker series. Just been fantastic, and it's been great kind of breaking in this studio with this broadcast today. Today's program was brought to you in partnership with the Hawaii Book and Music Festival, which is a joint venture between and the Hawaii Community Foundation and Kamehameha Schools. Sponsors of today's conversation include the State Climate Commission, UH's School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology. I'm Jeff Mikulina. Mahalo for joining us today. Remember, climate is not a spectator sport, so we hope you take some of the things you learned today and apply them. Thank you so much.